Hello everyone, it's Tuesday. It's around, I think it got to about 30 degrees and it's actually now, it's a little about 2 o'clock and it's dropped down to 29, but still quite a warm day and a light breeze, and looking at the palm trees out the window. I've got to say, I do love the view in this room. It's a shame I can't actually open the windows to get a clear shot because there's screens in the way and what have you, so it's a pity. Interesting, I went to the body corporate yesterday to get things sorted out with my payments, and he just said use the old number, and there had been screw ups with it, so no big surprise there. But what I did learn was that the guy who's the rep in this particular block for the body corporate, he's also having issues with noisy neighbours, so it's just an endemic problem living in flats, and that's why I'd be happier in, say, a villa unit or a house, preferably a villa unit because it's lower maintenance, but certainly low density living that's got a lot going for it in my opinion. But anyway, that's my little rave for the day. There's plenty of news as usual. I'll just do 2 stories. I think that's about all I can handle each time. The first actual article though that I'm going to read from has actually got an interesting angle, and it's good to see a bit of creativity amongst the journalistic fraternity, because there are a lot of hacks out there at the moment who haven't got a clue about journalism, and it shows the pathetic way they must be taught at universities. They're basically indoctrinated into left-wing dogma, but they don't teach them about actually doing investigative reporting by the looks of things, because they're lazy as, and they generally get a lot of their information through things like Twitter. It's pathetic. It really is. We need a major overhaul in our education system, which would in turn help journalism out. I mean, it's time to bite the bullet, I think, for all governments. Anyway, that's my little rave. Well, I'll just get into this story now. While presiding over one of the biggest government screw-ups ever will help Daniel Andrews get re-elected, with Aussie leaders on TV every day through the pandemic set to benefit. Queensland Labor Premier has a 4-point lead over Liberal National Opposition, and that's true, she does. Mind you, that's if you can believe the polls, and as we know, the polls have an inherent problem at the moment, that anyone who is right of centre feels much more reticent to actually tell pollsters the truth than someone on the left. So the polls are inherently they have an inherent bias in them. They can't do anything about the pollsters. They're basically stuffed right now. But I think it's because people who are right of centre are intimidated. They're worried about saying what they actually think. So that's the truth. And unfortunately, but I do believe Annastacia Dan may well win the election, which would be a terrible outcome in my opinion. So actually, just speaking, which I've got to go and vote. I think now the polling booths are open 2 weeks prior to the actual election. So it's only about a block away from here, so I should get out and about and actually do that after recording this. So we'll see how we go. WA Labor Premier Mark McGowan is also favourite to win the state in March, and he's basically just almost in a way has just taken the first step to secession from Australia by basically cutting himself totally off from the rest of the country, which is a really worrying trend, because not having borders within a country creates wealth, and it appears as if our constitution hasn't been robust enough to allow the federal government to really crack the whip. I mean, especially if you've got a weak leader like Scott Morrison, he just hasn't had the gumption to basically put them in their place, which they really needed to be read the Riot Act, in my opinion. Northern Territory and ACT leaders were recently re-elected in the wake of COVID-19 response, as was Jacinda Ardern over in New Zealand. Although New Zealand is a very woke country, so maybe we shouldn't draw too much from that. But it does sort of add to the point that these leaders that have been basically clocking down their citizens seem to be getting rewarded, and that worries me big time as a libertarian. It's sending a bad message out to politicians. Be authoritarian and get re-elected. That's exactly not what we want to be the message we want to be sending to our politicians, in my opinion, and I would think any thinking Australian's opinion too, for that matter. Experts believe incumbents have huge advantage over more media coverage. Yeah, well, the media is very biased towards left-wing politicians in particular. It's even worse in the US, where they can't even get a decent person to basically oversee the debates. They're all hard left people, that the ones they've chosen. It's just a joke over there. And the media here can be pretty tough on, generally much more tough on Liberals, especially the ABC, which is just an absolute disgrace. It's so biased, just crazy. Anyway, experts believe incumbents have huge advantage with more media coverage. Scott Morrison is expected to call an election next year to gain from COVID-19. Yeah, anything's possible. The coronavirus pandemic has handed Australian state leaders a huge political advantage because they're on television every day while their opponents struggle for recognition, a former Liberal Party leader has told Daily Mail Australia. As early voting begins for Queensland election, Labor Premier Annastacia Dan is polling a 4-point lead over Liberal National leader Deb Frecklington. Well, I've got to say, Deb Frecklington is anything but inspiring. I mean, it's a tough job being an opposition leader, but gee, she's really got to really pick to get into top gear, because she just doesn't seem to have the energy or the desire to really push the issues, and it's not good enough. You really have to work hard as an opposition leader. It's a thankless job, but that's what you're there for. Her expected victory would follow the re-elections of Northern Territory Labor leader Michael Gunner in August and ACT Labor leader Andrew Barr on Saturday. Well, I wouldn't hold much with ACT. That's basically a public servant town, and so they're extremely left wing. So that doesn't mean a great deal. But I guess we've got to look at the Northern Territory result, though. Meanwhile, Victoria Labor Premier Daniel Andrews, who faces election in November 2022, holds a steady 62% approval rating, presiding over the state's hotel quarantine debacle. Well, I dispute that 62% figure. The one I saw, the latest one, was actually 58. It actually had slipped a little bit, but it's still a majority, and he's still, he's riding high, and it just doesn't make any sense at all. It's like the Stockholm syndrome. The people who have been taken captive are basically empathising with their captor. Crazy stuff. Coronavirus outbreaks at 2 Melbourne hotels, where the state government chose to guard detainees with private security instead of troops, sparked Victoria's deadly second wave, which has killed more than 800 people, cost thousands of jobs. Oh, so it's only 800 people. What the hell? I think Dan needs to give him a pass. No, don't hold him responsible, for God's sake. Former Liberal Party leader John Hewson, who was the federal opposition leader in the early 90s, believes the coronavirus pandemic has helped incumbents for two main reasons. Well, I don't know why they're talking to John Hewson. He's a total dropkick, in my opinion, and he's basically now pretty much left of centre as well. So, an academic, of course, ex-academic. What do you expect? Firstly, daily media updates that premiers have been given alongside their health advisors have boosted their name recognition and starved their opponents of the limelight. Scott Morrison celebrates winning the 2019 election by watching the NRL. Pundits say he will go to the polls again next year. Premier Andrews has performed 110 daily media conferences in a row as Melbourne battles its second wave of the deadly disease. His presses are up to 2 hours long and seldom provide new information. Oh, well, he's just trying to bore people to death. Well, I mean, they're bored already. They're locked up. They were locked up like animals for months. 2 hours long with no new information, but crucially, they give Mr. Andrews much greater media exposure than opposition leader Michael O'Brien, who is relatively unknown. It's just the media here is rotten to the core. It simply is. The mainstream media is an absolute disgrace. Apart from Sky News, you might as well just kiss them goodbye. They're a waste of space. The hardest thing in politics is to get known. Mr. Hewson told Daily Mail Australia on Monday, to be known enough that people know who you are and what you stand for. It takes a lot of doing, so the incumbents have got a real advantage. That does go in line with how Trump was successful in 2016 as well. He underspent Hillary Clinton quite a bit, but because the media kept talking about him, he's already a media personality through through his TV show, but that added to it. That even added to his recognition. He had no problems being recognised. Everybody knew who he was, and that does help. Andrews gets a bit of a criticism from some sectors of the media, but he's got big electoral support. Secondly, Mr. Hewson believes voters are more reluctant to change their leadership during a crisis. Yeah, I think there's some truth to that too, actually. It's irrational, though. I mean, if they're doing a bad job, they should be given the arse, but I think actually, as little as I think of Hewson, I think he's actually made a good point there. You've got to have a good reason to start again in the middle of a crisis, he said. Voters think, don't change horses unless you really have to. Well, that's a perfectly apt comment about New Zealand. I'll let you think about that one yourself. Just look at a photo of Mrs. Ed and you might get an idea what I'm talking about. He said this mentally means that sitting members are unlikely to get turfed out of office as long as they have performed reasonably well. Annastacia Dan is going to be hard to beat. She's made mistakes, but in the circumstances, voters think the government is learning on the job and has done pretty well, more or less, he said. Learning on it's her second term, for God's sake, Hewson. That's a dumb comment. I mean, I don't buy that one. That's crazy. I mean, look, she's already had 2 terms of government. I think the learning curve has been achieved. It's basically a corrupt government that really, in normal circumstances, will be given the A. But at the moment, you're right. She might get back in, which would be a total travesty, and is going to really hammer the Queensland economy. It's a really worrying thing to me. But anyway, noting that Queensland's hard border with New South Wales has been popular with voters, he added Palaszczuk is sticking with the border and she's getting away with it. I've got to say, at least the press have held it to account with breaking up families, not allowing grieving relatives to go to hospital to see dying relatives in Queensland. It's just a disgrace, Palaszczuk. She's got a heart of ice. I mean, really, she's a political animal who basically all it's about is the numbers at the election day. That's all she seems to care about. On Saturday, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was re-elected in a landslide as voters rewarded her for holding the spread of COVID-19 with only 1,888 cases and 25 deaths. Yeah, that's quite a low figure, but again, don't celebrate too soon. You've already done that once and you had a second wave, and I bet you the COVID is lurking in the background, and without herd immunity, you could be in for a real shocker next year. So don't get too smug. This stuff, you can't take COVID lightly in that respect. It's lingering, so beware. Mr. Hewson also said the pandemic is benefiting Prime Minister Scott Morrison at the expense of Labor leader Anthony Albanese. Well, I think that's got a lot to do with Anthony Albanese's lack of charisma and rational policies. He's a total dropkick in my opinion, and it's made it so much easier for Scott Morrison. When you have someone that's that inept in the opposition position, it's a dream for the Prime Minister. Plus the fact that Labor, that was actually Kevin Rudd, has now made it almost impossible for the Labor Party to turf out a current leader, no matter how inept they are. Brilliant idea, Kevin. Another one of your winning ideas that you've burdened Labor with. Morrison has been getting massive media coverage while Albanese is not getting much. I don't know how he builds a profile, he said. Morrison commands media conferences. He doesn't answer questions he doesn't like, and if he doesn't like a journalist, he makes it clear and cuts them off, he added. He's a bloody stubborn bastard, Morrison, and I don't think he's got a great deal of imagination. And I think he's beholden to the public servants who basically set his agenda. It's a lazy way to govern, and that's the way he's going, in my opinion. I didn't realise until I actually started reading that article that it was John Hewson talking. He's a man with very little credibility. It's an interesting point, though, about the elections and the incumbents and the COVID situation. I think there is some validity in that argument, and it is a real worry to me because, as I've said before, what we need is social and economic liberation, not to be treated like criminals in a low security jail, which is what basically poor Victorians have had to put up with for some time. as I say, the Swedes trust their people a lot more than we seem to in the Anglosphere and other parts of the world that are cracking down really hard. I mean, it's not just the Anglosphere. I mean, places like Philippines has apparently got some pretty harsh lockdown measures, and it varies between countries. One thing at least a lot of these countries do have is the right to leave the country. We don't even have that because Morrison has basically said it's illegal for Australians to travel overseas unless they get a permit from the government, which I think absolutely stinks, and I will keep saying so until hopefully some media traction is sought with this. But I mean, there are bigger issues obviously with small businesses going to the wall, much more important than my ability to fly. But I've got to say, for my mental health, I really want to go back to Vietnam. I can't do it. Well, the Vietnamese aren't allowing us in anyway, so it's a moot point right now. But when the Vietnamese give the go, I might actually try to go for one of those permits. But I think it's a disgrace. I have to do that. If I was in New Zealand, I wouldn't. So work that one out. It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, look, I don't know if I will do another story today. I think I'll just leave it at that one and keep it short and sweet. And as usual, please give me thumbs up, thumbs down, comments. Comments are always appreciated. And subscriptions. If you want to subscribe to the channel, please do so. I could really do with a bit more support in that area, but I can't force you to subscribe. There's no... I don't know any way I can trick you into subscribing. I'm basically, that's it. Basically all I can do is plead on bended knee. Give me a subscription. So I'll leave it at that. Have a great day wherever you are. It's quite nice here, and I might go out and do a bit of voting. Get that little duty out of the way because I don't want to get fined for one, and I don't want to see Palashade's face in the media anymore. But I've got a horrible feeling I'm going to have to get used to looking at her schmoozing with celebrities and AFL players and all the rich and famous. It's just like a real hardcore Labor leader should, because I mean the empathy with the working class is there, of course. Yeah, right. Anyway, I'll leave it with you. Have a good day, and I'll see what I come up with for tomorrow.